Sana G Morning Show. What's up? It's your girl Sana. Hello.
Morning, DC is chilling.
Your player partner G Biz.
And we have the pleasure of talking to my guy Mano over here.
Mano.
Did I say it wrong again?
That's all right. You're getting closer. Second syllable.
I'm gonna say the whole thing now. Manohar. Raju. All right, I got it this time. I'm sounding silly right now. He is the San Francisco public defender, and he's actually taking the time to talk to us today because it's just a time to talk. It's a time to have these conversations and just learn more about the people that we rely on to, have our backs when different things arise. I know initially when we were corresponding that I wanted to focus on Breonna Taylor and her situation, which they're having a huge rally today in Kentucky for her. That's already underway at the state capitol over there because, why are these people still free? From what I understand from that situation, I'm not quite sure if you're super familiar with the case. it sounds like a departmental accident, and now that woman lost her life. One officer has been fired. So it's like, but she's not alone. There's cases upon cases that happen like this. We were just, before we started, talking about Elijah McClain, the teenager that was just walking home, who suffers from anemia. So he had a face mask on. Somebody calls 911. Before you know it, he's not with us anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me just, I think with Breonna Taylor, RIP, for her, it's really important that, and I think as a public defender, we're particularly situated to see that we not just, what happened on that day was tragic, but we have to go back deeper in time. Like, who was signing that no-knock warrant to begin with? Like, what was the reason in that situation that you had to, ram through a door? And what was that even based on? My understanding from looking into it is that they're saying there was a postal inspector who said there were some shoes, a package left there, a package with some shoes. That's enough reason. So who was the officer? And let's look back at that affidavit to that judge, and then let's examine the judge and why he signed it. Because to me, it was clearly formulaic language that a lot of officers will put in every warrant. And the exception that you need to get around the Fourth Amendment, you have to have very particularized reasons in that case. And let's examine why the judge signed that warrant. And then let's also obviously examine why there was a need to spray that unit with bullets, which was completely unnecessary, why you couldn't reposition, why you couldn't move back. So I just think it's really important that we not just look at the system in its entirety to see where the failings are in a deeper way.
Yeah, so that's been my big beef, right? Is that there's a lot of language around, arrest the officers, and while that it should be something that's looked into, right? Like you said, we got the judge that's going through that. We, have the, where's the captain, the sergeant, the lieutenant, the chief of police that authorized these actions prior to these officers going to really just enforce something that all these other people should have checked and balanced prior to when they had to walk through that front door.
Right. I don't know. I appreciate those comments, DC. I don't know if you've seen the Meek Mill documentary, but in the first, I think it's a 5-part series, I believe, but episode 1, he makes this really poignant point where he says, you know what, these shootings on the street and the violence on the street is something we need to address. But the reality is there's death happening through paperwork with judge signing and sentences and things happening in courts with people with ties all the time. And that's a different form of death in a way. That's a different form of impeding people's life progress. That's a different form of violence, state-sanctioned violence. We need to look at the whole system in its entirety.
And when you see these situations occur, right, my question is this: how do we even justify creating a law that changes that we can't have these no-knock entrances, right? But we still haven't held anybody accountable for this young woman passing. Like, how is that even fathomable?
Right.
That we'll be able to put this together. Like how?
Like, where do we start? You mean, or
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm going to quote Brother Brian Stevenson. Some of you may know of him, Equal Justice Initiative down in Alabama. And one thing he really talks about as a solution, a 4-part solution, is proximity. Like, we need to know the people that you're signing warrants on, or as defender, we need to get closer to the people that we're representing.
Right.
I think we have to start telling those stories, and we need to not wait until the moment when there's a killing to start telling the stories, right? And I think that's a key part of it, is let's just have a deeper understanding of who it exactly is you're policing and what some of the dynamics are to begin with. I mean, in San Francisco, we've had an issue with what they call gang task force. And in my opinion, they've historically labeled people as gang members based on them hanging out with people that they know, extended family members, and moving too quickly to an assumption that they're a gang member. So what I've started to do is calling community experts into the courtroom, people from the neighborhood, to say, let me tell you about this. This is a young person who, in light of where he came from and all the situations he has to navigate, is actually doing quite well. Does he know people who associate with this symbol? Of course he does, because of the neighborhood he's from. That doesn't mean he is a validated gang member. And I've even called experts, and I'm not endorsing carrying a gun by any stretch of the imagination, but you'll often see gang task force saying, this person is carrying a gun because a carpenter carries, just like a carpenter carries a hammer to do their business. And I've called community experts to say, no, this young person is actually carrying a gun out of fear. He's praying in the morning that he won't have to use it, and he prays when he got home that he didn't use it. And I think, but very few defense attorneys will actually call those kind of community experts to bring that type of wisdom into the courtroom. And I think that's how we start changing hearts and minds. We have to get people more proximate to the people they are trying to exercise power over.
Right.
From an
go ahead,
immigrant
Sana.
family,
Mano.
like, is that a part, Mano? Yeah, sorry.
It's
A part of the reason that you got into, the law?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Being a part of an immigrant family, right? Because I'm sure you know firsthand, like, some of the dealings that these people deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reality is, like, my family is from a farming village in India, and some of the same dynamics that you see in areas in the United States are actually in some ways more similar. Like, I feel like I could take people from my village to a jury in San Francisco, and they may be closer to the Bayview than some other people in San Francisco who are sitting on the same jury, even though only 3 miles away, right? I mean, San Francisco's a small city, but in many ways we're talking about different worlds, and that's why I think it's so important that we bring community experts into the room, and I think it's important we draw those connections. I was actually recently on a call or giving a presentation to the defenders from over 40 countries last Friday, and it's just amazing the consciousness that George Woods and the reaction to his murder, George Floyd, has created around the world internationally. There's just such a deeper awareness, and I think the civil rights movement and the Black Lives Matter movement in this country is bringing that international awareness and that urgency about the need for change right now.
Right, because the narratives around around the world about who Black folks are and why they get put into positions that they get put in sometimes it's not a balanced narrative, right? So then when you see this man who, we found out didn't actually do anything, being treated in that way, then it resounds with someone who's in another country who has dealt with authorities that are, treating them in a way that is unfair because of their financial background, their economic background, their, whether or not they're more or less brown than the people who live directly around them. Like, everybody can see that and say that's wrong.
Right, 100%. I mean, and I think it's, people, that video was so traumatic for so many to see, but when you look at the other videos, and then the New York Times put together a video that extends it out further, it's even more brutal. I mean, he was pulled out of that car at gunpoint, and I think a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of that. And also, let's keep in mind, this is during COVID time. This is a time when we've been emphasizing we need to not have people who are alleged to have committed very petty offenses, low-level felonies or misdemeanors in jails at this point. It should have been handled. There's a phone call from a store that says, we think someone used a counterfeit we're talking about $20 here, okay? It should have been, if there's an officer that needs to be called at all, it should have been an officer who approaches them and said, listen, store owner says you used a counterfeit dollar bill, $20 bill. I don't know if you knew about it or not. He apparently didn't know about it because he took the bill from you,
Right.
Having said that, here's a citation. come to court in 3 months. If the DA decides to file at all, they may not, because for lower level things, or maybe a neighborhood court, and we'll resolve it at that point. That should have been the most that happened in that situation. There's no need, not only is there no need for that type of force, there's no need for arrest at all. This is a time where there's been a national movement to decarcerate and to lower the jail population, because we know that people in these settings can lead to potentially serious illness or death. So I think we also have to look at it in that context of.
To your point, this is really crazy. We saw an article that we shared a couple weeks ago about a dude who literally stole a car, got arrested, got taken in, got out,
home burglary,
stole again, got arrested, taken in, and got back out the same day. So like, this is a situation that is nonviolent, that wasn't hurting anybody. That was, it's $20, right? You know what I'm saying? And and this got treated way differently than a dude who was like a carjacking burglar.
Right.
Who is still alive and roaming about the earth.
Yeah. And my hope though is, that what sticks out to me is his daughter on top of Stephen Jackson's shoulder. I don't know if you've seen that, and my daddy changed the world, and I think that's what he'd want. We really have to take this moment of international awareness to really make some substantive changes in the system on all fronts.
Where do you think that starts? Knowing firsthand the mistreatment and the misrepresentation of Black and brown, citizens, if they do end up in court, generally they don't have the funds to be able to take care of, rightful representation. Oftentimes, they're kind of forced into taking a plea deal or just signing off and saying, I just, consent to whatever goes on, no contest, right? How do we begin to make those changes so that we don't see these types of, not only these types of situations where, there's clearly mass racism that's going on within the system, but how it's directly affecting people and just taking years away from their lives?
Well, I think it's, as speaking from the public defender perspective, I think it's important that we bring it at a much higher level. I want people to think of the San Francisco Public Defender's Office as you're going to get much better representation than if you paid an attorney. And I'd like that to be the vision of what our office is. And, in my office, we encourage people, I want you to leave no stone unturned in your investigation. I want you filing every single motion. I want you having a long visit with your client within 48 hours of them coming into custody. I want you contacting family members within the first week. I want full wraparound representation, and I want it performed at a high level. And if you can't do that, don't work in our office. So that's my perspective. And not only that, I think it's really important that we change the perspective of what a true public defender's office is, because we really should be a public safety office. And when I say that, I mean this: if you are fully seen and fully heard, and someone who may feel that a lot of the institutions in society have failed you, and see someone really fighting for you, regardless of the legal outcome, I think that can be a big springboard into facilitating someone being in a better place going forward. Like having someone who truly believes in you, who truly fights for you. In our office, we have paralegals, investigators, social workers, and we desperately, for whatever reason someone came into being represented by us, rightfully or wrongfully, we want them to be in a better place at the end of our representation. And we desperately don't want them slipping back into the system. And we have that sense of trust with our clients because we've hopefully spent that amount of time with them, us and our social workers. So to me, to facilitate someone being in a better position, that's what public safety is about. We don't have to just lock people up again and put them in a cage. I think one of the issues with the criminal legal system in our country is we made a decision, or too many people have made a decision, that we define justice solely by the number of days that you are in a cage, as opposed to any other way. Have we really fully fought for someone to rehabilitate individuals and sustain communities in a productive way? And I think that's what we should start moving in that direction.
When people talk about defunding the police, and then now, like today on the show, we talked about how the school districts in San Francisco and Oakland have decided to take police out of the schools. From your experience, without telling on yourself, do you feel that there is a lot of funding that goes to the police department that could be for better use, like back into our educational system and some other stuff?
I do think I think absolutely there could be. I think we should be thinking about diverting some of that money into schools, into employment opportunities, into non-armed community facilitators, into circles, so that intergenerationally we can talk about healing, because there's intergenerational, but there's also a lot of intergenerational resilience.
Right.
How do we start working on healing that intergenerational trauma that's affected communities, while at the same time tapping into all that wisdom that's passed on through generations to create sound and healthy communities, and empower people in schools and job creation and healthcare? I mean, those are the areas that would actually make the need for police much less, because we have much healthier communities. And I think this is the time where we should really start thinking along those lines. And I'm receiving an email almost every minute from someone in the community saying, please defund the police. And I want to let everyone know I hear you, but I don't have the power to do that. I am trying to build up the public defender's office to be as strong as we can, so we can protect Black lives as well as we can in the courtroom.
Absolutely. I feel like you're fighting there, Mano. I feel good vibe from you, guy. I do.
I appreciate that you did.
Yeah.
I talk about this often in studio and with Sana and G-Biz, with folks in the community and all of that. You know, you're in a elected office, right? There are a bunch of other people who are in elected offices, who are downtown, and I just, you know, like reminding people, and, you know, you can advocate for yourself on this. The reason why you are, as, you know, in on the people who work for you is because you know that at the end of the day, if you're not getting it right for people, then they have the right and should hold the advocacy to say, well, we got to get this guy out of here. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But just talking about how important that is on a local level to support folks who are doing what they need to be doing, right? As well as to, you know, get 10 friends and tell them to tell 10 friends that if the person who isn't supposed to do what they're doing is in there, we got to get, you know, Black lives. If they don't care about, you know, systemic changes that are going to happen that benefit folks, then, you know, we got to run them up out of here.
Right. No, I agree with you. And I love what you're talking about, is that, you know, sometimes it can spread slowly. You talk to 10 friends and say, or talk to 2 friends and say, listen, tell 2 other friends. And all of a sudden you have 100, you have 200 people mobilized. And I think that that's, you know, that's really vital. And being an elected leader, I know I have the mandate of the people. So I will often try to put things out there in the media or on Twitter that I think will affect not just San Francisco, but we need to transform the way we think about things, you know, statewide and nationally. I mean, right now there's an outbreak in San Quentin, and the reality is a lot of those numbers that people are doing, it's not as if a jury carefully deliberated. A lot of times what happened is someone pled to something, to your point, G-Biz earlier, they pled to something because it was way overcharged. And frankly, maybe they felt my attorney's not fighting hard enough for me, or he's telling me to take this deal and he isn't. So I don't feel confident going in front of this jury, particularly when the jury, I don't see anyone who looks or is from my neighborhood who looks like me. So I'm just going to plead to some number. And now we're attached to that number without looking really deeply at it. And I think to that point I was making earlier about proximity, if someone spent some time with an individual in custody, probably say, well, this person isn't a harm to anyone at this point. They're not a danger. They can be left out. But we get attached to these, frankly, sometimes arbitrary numbers that people are doing time on. And that's tragic.
Mano, I'm going to ask a serious question here.
Sure.
Feel free to plead the fifth, but I'm gonna go straight through it. Working within the justice system in San Francisco, do you know known racists who hold positions of power in that system?
Working within the system, if they are a known racist or not doesn't matter as much to me as are you acting in such a way that has a racist impact. And the reality is, I think that happens a lot. I'll give you examples of situations where one example is I had an attorney who was back in chambers discussing a case with the judge, and he was saying, oh, okay, I'm going to let this individual out. I see the facts. Not that serious. There's no reason to hold this person in on bail. They can make it their next court appearance from out of custody. And the name was one that did not appear to be a person of color in any way. That was what the attorney said. Go into courtroom, African-American man walks out, and all of a sudden the judge says, you know, I've actually reconsidered what I thought about this, and I'm gonna, you know, put bail on this case. And my attorney, which I'm proud of her, said, wait, nothing changed except the color of the skin of the person who walked out of the tent next to the courtroom. And he said, are you calling me a racist? And she said, well, now that you asked, yes, I am. You know?
Right.
And, you know, the point about that is we need to be willing to call that out when we see it. And
Right.
And Stephen's like, you're going to have to be willing to be uncomfortable sometimes and call things out. And you may not be popular in that moment, but it's very important that we do that, you know. And I think we have to be very conscious talking, even with jurors, about race issues and being very explicit with them. The days of, you know, being race blind are over. We need to be directly and confronting jurors with it, just make sure they're weeding out their own implicit biases that they should be on a jury. You know?
And everybody has the accountability in that room, right? Like the people who are sitting there and watching that are going, okay, that dude's, you know, acting in a way that's racist. Maybe we need to, again, elected official, judge.
Right.
Run him out.
Right. Absolutely.
I have a question.
Yes.
So with systemic racism, as crazy as it is, and we all know it's a real thing, in your history and experience in defending these people, how often do you feel like a person is innocent and still gets convicted of a crime that you honestly in your heart feel that they did not commit, especially people of color?
Yeah. I mean, I think that happens every single day in every courtroom.
Absolutely.
And the reason is the vast majority of convictions don't happen from a trial. They happen from a plea. And what's not uncommon to see a prosecutor saying at the original arraignment date, this person is a danger to society, or I don't think there's a public safety issue. I don't think they're going to come back to court, on and on, set bail or detain them. 10 days later, when it's time for a hearing, oh, you can go home today. Just plead guilty to this strike and you can go home right now and we'll dismiss these other 2 strikes. And I'll tell you a story about the type of thing that could be charged as a strike. I used to be in the Contra Costa Public Defender's office, and I was representing a young man, and he was going through the woods and had a branch in his hand, and he sees his cousin on a scooter. His cousin should have been in school. And my client was just carrying the little branch because he was going through the woods. And the young cousin said to my client, you can't tell me where to go. You're not my dad. And my client says like this, and he didn't swing it, but on the backswing, he just says, well, if I was your dad, I'd hit you with this branch. Unfortunately, it inadvertently scraped the cheek of the young person. They charged my client with assault with a deadly weapon, you know, for the scratch on the cheek. And the reality is in a certain part of the county, in a client with a different complexion, that may get charged as a misdemeanor or not charged at all. It might be just called to parents. But because of where he was from, it gets charged as a strike, right? So, and there's a tendency in that situation for someone to say, well, I got you a non-strike that's a felony, so plead to this. So those kind of things happen all the time. And I think there's 3 reasons, multiple reasons for it, but some of them are: 1, pretrial detention. So even though you're presumed innocent, so many people who are presumed innocent wind up in custody waiting for their day in court.
Right.
Overcharging. The prosecutors have so much discretion that they can charge whatever they want to. And I'm going to go back to Meek Mill just because that documentary is fresh in my mind. He was charged with like 19 counts for, he literally carried a gun for 2 steps because he wanted to go to the store and come back home in a neighborhood where he didn't feel safe at the time of day he was going out. 3, what's called a trial tax, where you're often in a pretrial conference and they'll tell you, well, you can plead to 4 years today, but just so you know, if you get convicted of trial, I may give you 16 years, 20 years, 25 years. So you don't have to take this deal, but just so you know, this is what you're looking at. And then sometimes the rulings we get in trial are not as fair as they should be, because oftentimes there's people with a little more of a prosecutorial mindset on the bench.
Right.
Those are all the reasons that I think people are convicted all the time of things they're not. Now, having said that, I'm also a believer in hopefulness. And I think it's really important that, in my perspective, I try to really infuse hope in my clients, and I work really hard, and I'm going to do everything I can for them. So I'm going to empower my clients to try to get over all those obstacles and still get the best result possible in the case. So I don't want people to feel that everything is lost, but there's a lot of uphill battles, and we need both structural reform and then we need individual reform at the same time.
You mentioned a bench. What's interesting about that is I was listening to someone the other day talk about how, and again, to reference Mano, another thing that you said earlier about proximity, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
On a personal responsibility basis, people need to understand that when you see that jury summons in the mail, you may be representing someone who
Mm-hmm.
is in close proximity to you, right? And if you're not sitting there, you're leaving a seat open for someone who may have their own biases, right? And may not know those people's stories, may not be from the neighborhoods that you're from. And that person, that may be the person that tips the scale and sends that person away for some weirdo mandatory minimum, right? Rather than you being there and using your discretion to say, oh, well, I get that. I understand that. Maybe that doesn't need to go that way.
Thank you so much, DC, for putting that message out there. And I remember speaking at SF State, and there were some students I have so many issues with the criminal justice system, so I don't bother going to court. And I'm like, you know what? You know who else has issues with the criminal legal system? The person sitting next to me in that chair. And he needs as many fair-minded people in that jury box as possible with as many diverse perspectives as possible. So please, please honor that jury summons. It is one area where you can participate in democracy, and we need as many fair-minded people with as many perspectives to be there as possible. We can work on reform of the system, and absolutely must work on it, but we also, for that individual there, we need people to be in the jury box, and we need diversity.
I saw you fighting for people to get paid more.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I don't think in a city with, there's a lot of wealth in San Francisco, and I don't think that in this city we should have people for whom it's an economic hardship to serve on that jury. And if it is an economic hardship, then we should be filling in that gap so that people get paid, that those who need it get paid a living wage so that they can be on that jury, because everyone should have the right to participate in that democracy, and in our democracy through the jury system. And frankly, it's oftentimes people who are in the neighborhood that are most going to be impacted that are being excluded off, and they're the ones who have the most vested interest in being on the jury. So, yeah.
A lot of people don't know you're the founding member of Public Defenders for Racial Justice. And I know I was talking to I believe your secretary or one of your associates about a practice that you do every Monday. Do you mind sharing that with everybody? Sure.
Well, we kneeled for George Floyd, and we had a Black Lives Matters moment kneel down in front of 850 Bryant, which is the courthouse in San Francisco. But to me, it's important that it not just be something that happens on a Monday. Like, if you're about Black Lives Matter and if you're about racial justice, you have to be about it throughout your practice. So, just this last Monday, I kneeled for Breonna Taylor. And I think for me, it's just a personal practice that every Monday I'm going to reflect on someone who has suffered from police violence, a victim of police violence, or someone who's been working for racial justice or some moment, and sort of kneel in honor of that, so that it remains my commitment going forward. And we started the Public Defenders for Racial Justice, some of us, which is a Pan-Bay Area organization, after the Michael Brown shooting and all those shootings that were going on in 2015. For the same reason, we thought it was vital that people realize that while we have to attack and try to do everything we can to end police violence on the streets, the same type of thing happens in courtrooms, and we need to bring that race consciousness and that racial justice perspective to courtrooms also. And we thought Black Lives Matter movement and all the brilliance and public awareness that had come through that movement, it's a time in court halls that we'll be willing to listen to things that we've been saying for a long time, which were on techniques to bring more of that truth into courtrooms.
I think our time is running out, Mano. I got it right. Hey.
You did.
So I appreciate your time today. I know you probably have a busy schedule, and as things come up, if you don't mind, we'll probably tap back in with you and just see where your head's at with different things taking place, especially here today.
I'd love to be invited back. Thank you so much, Sana, G-Biz, and DC. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I really appreciate the invite out.
Thank you.
Listen, one of my best friends is as a public defender in Alameda County. So okay. I know the work that y'all are doing, and y'all are doing the Lord's work every day, man. So thanks.
Well, I appreciate you keeping this national conversation going at such a high level. It's really a beautiful thing to see.
Absolutely. Keep fighting that good fight, Mano.
Yeah,
Thank you.
We need you. Thank you.
I appreciate you.
All right.
Bye. Bye, big kids.
All right, y'all.